Coming up next on Beyond the Clef, I am honored to be joined by Colonel Thomas Palmatier, who is the retired commander of the Army Band, Pershing's own. We're going to be talking today about his time in the Army Band, some stories about him growing up, and the time when he was working in Washington at the White House with presidents, some interesting stories there. Then we get to talk a little bit about his thoughts on music education, some pretty serious issues that he wanted to bring up with everybody, especially about higher education, and some advice that he has, some great advice, and some articles that he has coming out in SBO Magazine. That's all coming up next on Beyond the Clef.
Beyond the Clef is presented by Director's Choice.
So thank you so much for being here. We have Colonel Thomas Palmatier, retired from the Army and commander of the Army Bands, and I'm so honored to have you on the program today. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's such a treat to be here at Heritage Middle School. What a fabulous day with these young musicians. Really, it's been my honor to be here with them, and it's great to talk with you and your audience.
Yeah. So to tell everybody what's going on, we had a whole day that we got to not only pick your brain, but get you in front of the kids, and you've just been absolutely fabulous. Your energy, I've learned so much. My kids learned so much. It was just a real treat for us.
Well, I just love being with kids, and
Right.
you know, my roots are in music education, and all throughout my military career, which spanned nearly 38 years, it's very easy in that world to kind of lose touch with the rest of the music world. But I actively tried to remain active in music education and would do a lot of free clinics and things like that. And now that I'm retired from the Army, when I'm not out guest conducting and clinicking, I do a lot of substitute teaching, because you've got to keep that. You've got to exercise that muscle and how to get in there with kids and find a way to reach them and to inspire them. If you can't engage and inspire them, you can't teach them. And that's what we're there. We're there to teach them, but first you've got to engage and inspire. So.
And I've seen that today. It's absolutely fabulous how you can instantly get in and get those kids. You can tell you're a master teacher, and that's what I really respected about getting to watch you today. You mentioned you sub. Mm-hmm. Here you are, Colonel Palmatier, and you sub in classes. I mean, what a treat for those kids. But we have to back up for the audience a little bit. Can you tell us, for those of you who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a band kid. I'm from upstate New York. Burnt Hills, Ballston Lake was a wonderful suburban district north of Albany. Great music educators. And I started in 4th grade, started on trumpet like pretty much everybody. And I did really well. I was first chair, first trumpet in my 5th grade band, and my 5th grade band director was Anthony Maiello.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
We've had him on the program before, actually.
Yeah, Tony was my 5th grade band director. It was his first year teaching, and he was a ball of energy. And all I knew was like, holy cow, if somebody can be that excited. I didn't understand half of what he was saying, but I knew he meant it. And he really made a big impression on me, and we're still very, very close friends. So he was my 5th grade band director. By the time early 7th grade came by, the music was getting high enough, and I couldn't play above the 3rd space C. No matter how much I practiced, no matter how hard I tried, that's as high as I could go. And so as the music got higher, I started slipping down in the section. And my 7th grade band director, who I owe my career to, the life I have now, I owe to Don Boucher, because he recognized that I had maybe some ability and certainly a lot of want to, but I couldn't do what I needed to do on that instrument. So he changed me to tuba. And in 9th grade, I was selected for the New York All-State Band and became first chair with Dr. William Ravelli was the conductor. Now, when Dr. William Ravelli was the director of bands at the University of Michigan, famous for having fabulous bands, but also famous for no one left a rehearsal without somebody crying. He was an old school tyrant. He was a tough cookie. And whenever you displeased him in any way, you went to the bottom of the section. So there was a constant musical chairs going on in every section. And I started first chair and I ended first chair.
And that's what's important.
That was, I ended first chair with Dr. Ravelli. So then I was so lucky that I attended the Crane School of Music, because it's a great music ed school, but it's small enough that it allowed me to explore other parts of what I wanted to do. I was a tuba major, but I also had studied voice all through college, and as opposed to maybe some larger schools where they would discourage you from kind of having a double because it would distract from your major, it was like, fine. So I took voice lessons as well. I was able to be first chair in the Crane Wind Ensemble as a first semester freshman. But I'll tell you the story behind that because I think it's very instructive that the jobs this doesn't apply just to music. The jobs go to people who show up on time. And the wind ensemble director was Elliot Del Borgo, very well-known composer. And he had a rule. Crane Wind Ensemble rehearsed once a week, 7 to 9 p.m. on Monday nights. But his rule was at 7 p.m., he locked the door. And if a seat was empty, that person was out. Didn't matter. Why? It had to literally be a life or death. And then you were probably dead. So the chair was open anyway. And so everybody it spread around that everyone wanted to hear the wind ensemble rehearsal. So we all knew that you hung around the door of wind ensemble with your instrument, just in case there was an opening. And it was the night before they were to perform at Eastman Hall, the home of the Eastman Wind Ensemble. So you can imagine Crane Wind Ensemble in upstate New York now going to play at Eastman Hall. It's kind of like when the Red Sox visit the Yankees, you know. I mean, Crane is a fabulous music ed school. Eastman is Eastman, but still, we were taking our wind ensemble into the belly of the beast and doing a concert. And Professor Del Borgo was so committed to you've got to be on time that this was the dress rehearsal. The door clicks. A minute later, I see 2 senior tuba players huffing down the hall with their horns, late. Door opens. They really, really sorry. And he said, sorry, guys. Bye-bye. And he pulls out a notebook, and the studio teachers gave Professor Del Borgo a very, very highly secret list of all their students in rank order. So he started calling out tuba players. And my name is Palmatier. Not that easy to pronounce, so I hear, Palmatier. And I said, yes, sir. He said, got your horn with you? Yes, sir. Do you own a tux? Yes, sir. He said, your first chair. Go. So I sight read the rehearsal and the performance then the next night at Eastman Hall as first chair of the Crane Wind Ensemble as a first semester freshman. And, it was all because Don Boucher switched me to tuba and because I had a band director, Tom Brown, who was also kind of a tyrant. But there was no such thing as being late. You could be late to other classes. You could not be late to band. And so I knew that one of the secrets to success in band is early is on time is late. So I was there on time, ready to go, and I owned a tux. So, and the rest is history, After completing my degree at Crane, and I was, again, it was a very flexible environment. I was able to do it in 3 years because I went to summer school. So I graduated in 3 years. I got a grad assistantship at what is now Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri, teaching tuba and euphonium and also assisting with jazz bands. And I had been gigging a lot and playing in clubs, playing string bass. So I was a jazz guy. And 2 years there, wonderful experience getting to teach at the university level. And then I knew I wanted to teach, but I also knew that I wanted to play, and I didn't feel like it was realistic to play the amount that I wanted to play and still be a great teacher. So I decided I wanted to go in the Army and maybe get some education money together to be able maybe to get a doctorate or something, and but mostly just get some money, because after 2 college degrees, I wanted some money. So I joined the Army, and with no grand plan, never had a master plan, never anything, and I liked it, and I was so blessed that early in my career, I had a director, or my sergeant major, who said, "Don't worry about what your next job's going to be. Don't worry about getting promoted. Don't worry about this. Just do the very best job you can wherever you are, and other people will take care of you. And for some reason, I listened to him. And he's absolutely right. If you do the best job you can, if you really devote yourself to your job, the other people there, the people who are in charge, that's their job then to take care of you. You don't need to spend time worrying about, oh, what's my next job? And when you're looking over people's shoulders, seeing what the next conversation is going to be about. Just focus on doing a great job. And people took great care of me. So I went from private up through to become a junior NCO, a sergeant, and then I was a warrant officer commanding our smaller bands, and then I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. And when I retired in my 14th rank, I had commanded the U.S. Army Field Band and the U.S. Army Band, and I'm the first Army officer ever to have the privilege to command both of those premier bands. I had been the founding commandant of the Army School of Music and was the senior director of music in the armed forces at that time. So there was never any plan. I just was a band kid who, when they say go play here, I went and played there, and just worked hard and tried to be on time. So that's the story.
So in your career in the Army, you have gone from band kid to meeting 8 sitting presidents, you said? And performing in how many countries?
54 countries, all 50 states, kings, queens, popes, emperors. It's been mind-boggling when I think about it.
What was your most interesting story about a foreign dignitary that you performed for?
Wow. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Well, one of the biggest shocks, I think, was at Arlington National Cemetery when a foreign dignitary comes, either a head of a military or a foreign head of state or a head of foreign government, they would often lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns. And and the Army Band as the senior service does almost all of those. So we would play the United States anthem and the visiting country anthem. And the visitor was the Emperor of Japan, who normally you don't touch, certainly. Well, we're also wearing gloves. Anyway, after we finished, the Emperor of Japan went by and he bowed and thanked each of the members, each of the segments of the honor guard, and the Emperor of Japan came over and bowed and said that was a most inspiring rendition of the Japanese national anthem, and held his hand out to be shook. Well, we were taught when you wear gloves, you never shake hands gloved. So I took off my glove very quickly, which is not easy because they're super tight. So I took it off and shook the Emperor's hand and bowed. And you could hear this kind of like from the Japanese there, because I mean he held it out his hand. It was not a faux pas to shake his hand, but it was like, ooh, he got to touch the Emperor.
So he was bestowing a big honor on you.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of doing I conducted the Japanese anthem. Now I'm trying not to do anything wrong. I got to get this glove off, and now I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
But so that was pretty cool.
So you did a lot of work with a lot of presidents.
Yes.
And
yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that interaction?
Well, I first arrived at the U.S. Army Band Pershing Zone toward the end of the Reagan administration, and did some White House arrival ceremonies with the Reagans, and that was a big thrill. I mean, you talk about starstruck, and I'm a first lieutenant. I'm in my early 30s, and I'm on the White House lawn with the Reagans. That was pretty great. But I was there throughout the entire Bush 41 term, and that was the bulk of the time that I was there. And they were just such amazing, wonderful, warm people. And we're recording this soon, not that long after Mr. Bush's demise and the state funeral, and people, I think, got a better look at what a great person and what a great man he really was. Well, we saw that every day. He was an amazing person, and the family was terrific. So there was one day at the White House, there was a ceremony that we call ambassador credentials. When a foreign country sends an ambassador to the United States, they cannot function as ambassador until they present their formal credentials to the president, and then it's accepted. And that's a very important thing because the countries want to have a functioning ambassador, but by international law, they can't do anything until that's done. So it's very important to those countries that those ambassadors are credentialed as soon as possible. Well, it's a very, very brief ceremony, so the Department of State, working with the Department of Defense, would generally bundle about a dozen of them. So we would have a dozen limos lined up out there in the driveway at the White House, and outside the White House, we would have a long line of flags alternating U.S. and the visiting ambassador's flag. Well, so the first one would be lined up. Limo would line up, and I was directing the U.S. Army Herald Trumpets up on the balcony of the White House. So I'd do a fanfare as they come out, and my job was to do a fanfare as they come up and have the last note cut off at the very instant that the ambassador's foot hit the ground. And luckily, I could see it underneath the limo. They were on the other side. And a quick aside, one time it was from an African country, and it was very, very cold, and when the foot hit the ground, they were in bare feet. And it turns out they were in literally grass skirts, and it was the traditional, ceremonial garb from their country. But back to this, that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
It was about 28 degrees, and he was barefoot and in a grass skirt. But so in this case, the ambassador rolls up. We would play ruffles. We would play a fanfare. The president would come out, shake their hand, go in the White House. All the flags change. So we're about to do 12 of them. Just getting ready to start, and the White House door opens, and Mrs. Bush comes walking out, and Millie, their dog, comes walking out, and Millie runs straight toward me. I'm all by myself on the front of the White House on the lawn, and we had dogs, so of course Millie comes over and smelling that, and I'm petting Millie and talking to her and scratching her belly, and Mrs. Bush comes over and says, "How are you doing today?" "Gosh, it's a beautiful day," and it was gorgeous, and she just asked where I'm from, and if I had kids, and just what, and then she said, "So what are you doing here today?" I said, "Well, we got some ambassadors here to see your husband." And then she said, "Well, that's nice." And I said, yeah. And she said, "So how's this go?" And I said, "Well, the ambassador comes in, they meet your husband, then they go out the back door, and then we do another one." I said, "Oh, that's really interesting." He says, "When's this supposed to start?" I said, "Well," and it was supposed to have started. I said, "Anytime now." And she said, "So was it supposed to, if Millie and I go back inside the White House, does that mean you can start and go home?" And I said, "Well, you can kind of do what you want at your house." And she said, "Don't worry, I know you want to go home." So she goes, Millie, let's go. So they go in the White House, the doors close, we reset, we knock out, we knocked out
Sure.
12 ambassadors.
Yeah, yeah,
I
right.
think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So we do 12 ambassador credentials, get on our bus, go back. Well, later that night, the news came that Operation Desert Storm had kicked off.
Oh, wow.
And when the timeline was revealed the next day, they gave the timeline of the events of the day, and we discovered that Mr. Bush had done the ambassador credentials, had been standing 15 feet from me, looked me in the eye, waved. After those 12 were done, he went straight down to the White House Situation Room and gave the go order. Like minutes later, when you looked at the timeline, by the time we were done, it was like 4 or 5 minutes later, Commander-in-Chief is in the Situation Room giving the go order for Desert Storm. So that they were wonderful, wonderful people, and I had the chance to, I remember the first White House arrival that I did when Mr. Reagan was president, Mr. Bush was Vice President and President-elect. And it was my first one, it was my first White House arrival. So I'm pretty nervous. So I'm standing there, and I know the Herald Trumpets are on the balcony in back of me. And all of a sudden I see the entire Bush family and the Quayles, who are now there with him, even though he's still Vice President-elect, and other people pointing up at the White House where my guys are standing on the balcony and pointing there and laughing. And I'm thinking, what is going on? They're pointing at the Herald Trumpets, laughing. Well, right behind their Herald Trumpets are glass windows. And Barbara and Jenna Bush, who were at that time maybe I don't know, 11, 12 years old, something like that. We're Bush 43's children. We're up against the glass windows in back of the Herald Trumpet, smashing their faces up in the window, and the family was sitting there laughing at them. So, I kind of did, they were laughing and everything, and of course I'm not really supposed to turn around, but I did come discreetly to attention, face about, just to look, and then I saw what was going on, face right back about. Okay, I'm okay. So that's, I have to say that of all the presidents that I've got to meet, Mr. Bush was somebody very special to me simply because I got to see him and his family up close. And when you meet presidents and their families, what you discover right away is they are people. They are not necessarily what you see on TV. They're people, and so you get a sense of what they're really like. And with Mr. and Mrs. Bush, they were incredible people and totally devoted to the nation. And it was so wonderful to see the state funeral carried off with such professionalism and polish, and a true tribute to our Commander-in-Chief. Not an accident, because as the senior service, the Army Band is called upon to organize many of those joint service events. So those state funerals are planned to the nth degree, years and years and years in advance, and practiced regularly.
And you had a hand in Bush 41's services.
Well, I had a planning hand in it,
planning
yes,
it, yeah.
Because as the ceremonies officer at the Army Band, when Mr. Bush left office, someone would meet with him and go over, what do you want for your services? What kind of music do you want? This sort of thing. And then those wishes would filter their way down to me. And it was my job to come up with the hymn or hymns at each one of those locations and to assign what they would play, so that it would be consistent with the overall theme, but not have every band play Amazing Grace or every band play God Bless America.
And you even said that you even try to make the keys diverse enough.
Yes, we didn't want to have two back-to-back things in the key of B flat. So, but we wanted to have them related, so you do a B flat and then an E flat, and then the next pair might be an F and a B flat. Some two keys that would feel good together but not be the same key. So all of those selections were picked out way back when, and it was great. There was one. I had a personal copy of the plan, and there was one event coming up, and my wife and I were watching it, and the band brings their instruments up, and I said, "Well, they're about to play," and they did. But so, I mean, there are occasionally some changes over the years with the plans, but in this case, they played what was assigned 20 years ago. So.
Right. Right. Now, you were in the Pentagon, and you've been a part of this band world in Washington, D.C. in a lot of varying times, yes. Right? From the Reagan to Obama, and you were there in the Pentagon, or around the Pentagon at 9/11, and that's obviously changed a lot. But how is it when you are in entity that is not a political entity working around a world that is very obviously political? Well,
as I hope everyone knows and appreciates, our military is apolitical. And as a senior officer, which I consider myself a senior officer right from my days as a junior officer, I felt like I had an obligation to not reveal my political preferences. And I've voted in every election, but I think I always thought I do my job well if my soldiers don't know who I voted for. So but where I really got to practice it was working on the inaugural committees. Because when a president is inaugurated, there are a number of committees. There's a congressional inaugural committee that controls the swearing-in ceremony. There is the armed force. There's the presidential inaugural committee that is the overall, and that really calls the shots. And then there's the Armed Forces Inaugural Committee that supports both of them. And so you need to, when you are working on what we call AFIC, the Armed Forces Inaugural Committee, you would be there months before the election was held. planning, because you're planning the parade, the balls, the concerts, all of the ceremonies, everything that goes on. You're doing all of the logistical planning ahead of time. But there, in terms of decisions about who's in the parade, who's going to give the prayer, who's going to do this, those are decisions made by the Presidential Inaugural Committee. So I would say that my sense of how to separate my role and the role of our elected representatives was made very, very clear to me, and I was able to practice it every 4 years by working on those inaugural committees, because we would be the subject matter experts, we would know how to do it. So I was working on the parade, and we had spent months working on the parade, taking all the applications, grading the videos, not selecting the bands, but grading them. And then the Presidential Committee would come in, and they would assign a political person who had worked on the campaign to be in charge of the parade. Now, things worked great when they would come in and go, "You're the expert, I'll help you get the decisions that you made." Thumbs up. Things don't work quite as well if they come in and they say, "Well, I was told I'm in charge," and now they decide they want to decide how a parade will go.
Right.
Well, we're going to march at 116 beats per minute. That's what the parade's going to be,
Right.
So it's a very highly organized, orchestrated thing. But it worked great, and I got to meet a wonderful campaign operative from Ohio who came in and said, "You're the expert. I'll rely on you for advice." He said, "But if anybody gives you beef, you come to me, and when you need decisions about things, you come to me, and I'll get them done." And he did. He handled the complaint from Congressman so-and-so's office that this band from his district wasn't selected. He said, "Ship that to me. That's not you don't have to argue with the congressman." And so it was a great partnership, but it also made it very clear to me our role is to facilitate the instructions of our elected leadership. It's not to make policy. And as I served overseas, to include very politically sensitive trips to China, to Russia, and many, many other countries where in press conferences one time in Belarus, the first question that I was asked in a press conference was, "Why does the United States hate us?" And I'm there as a representative of the United States, and you had to be able to not make policy, just and make it clear that here's why I'm here, but I don't make policy, and I don't offer opinions on policy. And to this day, even though I'm retired, I still vote, but I am very careful about how I indicate my feelings about that, because I'm still an Army officer and still very proud of it.
So now in your retirement, you are writing articles for the SBO magazine.
Yes.
And you have some that are not out yet and some that you can kind of tease for us as they come out. But let's talk about what you mentioned to me, your recent article about strategic decisions.
Sure. And before that, I'm going to put a plug in for your readers for sbomagazine.com. And it's obviously I guess it's a for-profit thing, but it's free. Digital subscriptions are free, and for all music educators, they will send hard copies to your band and orchestra room for free. So, and it's a great resource, and it costs you absolutely nothing, and you get to read my columns. So, so my last published article was how to make your music program indispensable. Well, if you think about what makes us different than every other subject in school, we are the only ones that put on public performances. And we get to control the content. Well, you can say that the sports teams put on public performances, but they don't get to control the content. That's a contest. Mm-hmm. We get to control the content. So, so in the article I talk about, what the first step should always be asking yourself, why am I doing this concert? And if the answer is we've always done a spring concert, that's the wrong answer. Now, maybe the answer is that, well, one, this is kind of, music as performance art. This is kind of our midterm exam. Maybe the answer is we want to show to the parents, to the administration, to the audience, how much we've achieved. But you can have several purposes to a concert. And one of those purposes doesn't cost you anything to do, and it can be very powerful, which is help your school tell their story. And so I learned this in the Army because think about, music educators, arts educators are constantly having to prove to administrators our worth. STEM doesn't have to prove their worth, even though maybe they should, but it's taken as a given. Well, they're worthy. But arts educators have to prove their worth. Well, we can do that by being strategic communicators, because you get to put on a public performance. Now, let's say instead of, you're going to play your 3 pieces on your concert, and let's say instead of the usual thing, play a piece, and then the band director goes to the microphone and maybe mumbles 2 or 3 things that they just thought of at the last minute, or they don't say anything and the audience sits there looking at their phones. That's the typical concert. And if you're transitioning between groups, oh boy, that's dead time. Well, what if instead you went to your amazingly creative young people and said, I'm going to put you on the spot now. What's the motto of your school, or the vision statement, the mission? What's the motto?
Our district motto is seek perfection, capture excellence.
Oh, there it is. That's perfect. So what if the theme of your concert is seek perfection and capture excellence? And then between each selection, you just challenge your band. You said, hey, everybody, go ahead and record your own videos about what that means to you and how you think that this piece of music or our concert or what we do in rehearsals, how that applies to that. And then instead of dead air between that, you show that up on the screen for the audience. One of their students saying, here's our motto, and here's how we do it here in band. And this is what it means to me. That's pretty powerful stuff. First off, the parents of those kids are going to be thrilled beyond belief. You know who's going to be more thrilled?
Administrators.
The administrators, superintendent, because they're going to go, finally, somebody gets it. Finally, somebody gets it, and they're telling my story. And that's a perfect model, because I'm going to go off on another tangent here. I recently heard somebody, I wish I could remember who it was. Maybe it was Robert W. Smith. I don't know. But it was great. He was talking about seeing Michelangelo's David and it is a stunning sight. It doesn't just look like a statue. It's so real and perfect, you can almost see blood coursing through its veins.
I've seen it. I'm sure you have too. It's amazing.
And he said, that's what we're trying to do. We start a piece of music as a gigantic block of granite, and we keep chipping away and chipping away and chipping away. And most of us, if we're lucky, we get to the point where it looks like a big chunky stick figure. It looks like the Hulk or something like that. But it's very rare that we get that piece of music to the point where it really looks like what's really there underneath. But can you imagine getting it to the point where you could see blood coursing through the veins? That's perfection. And so that's what we're trying to do. We start here, and we're going to seek perfection, but along the way, we just might make a great statue. It might not be Michelangelo's David, but it might be great. And we've captured excellence. There you go. There's your next 10 concerts.
That's fantastic.
You're welcome.
I'm definitely going to use that. I really will. I'll have to send you a video. And just to go into some specifics, something that you said today to my band that really, once you said it, the kids figured it out, and it was just something about the next time when you played it, myself and the assistant were sitting in the back of the room, and we were just beaming with a smile, because in our non-varsity band, it was, you said, you asked the kids, what does crescendo mean? And someone raised their hand, and you knew what they were going to say. Yeah. They say, get louder. And you said, your band directors lied to you. And of course, a couple of them, I think it was early in the rehearsal, a couple of them, what? And they look over at me, and you say, no, start soft. Yeah. Crescendo means start soft. And once they did that, they started to understand what it was. I think they knew what get louder means.
Yeah.
But when you said start soft, they all of a sudden understood the entire concept.
Yeah.
And then they played that crescendo so amazingly.
Oh, it was great.
It was fantastic. Well, now, you also mentioned an article that is pending about higher education.
Yeah, yeah. This was hard, and I'm worried that I may not have hit the target right, but I thought it was important to get the issue out there. It's very easy to throw stones at those who are educating our future music educators, and I didn't want to be one of those, and that's why I was very troubled. But on the other hand, I've seen some trends, and I'm seeing things happening within the higher education of music that I think is going in the wrong direction for music education. And whether or not I express it correctly is, I hope I do. Part one, the first article that's about to come out, we're recording this in, is it still February? It's the end of February.
Very end of February.
Yeah, so the March 2019 issue of SBO will be part one. We'll talk about the proliferation of music performance degrees. And in doing this research, I got some wonderful help from NASM, the National Association of Schools of Music, gave me statistics on the number of students enrolled and graduated, and the number of degree programs of various types. I also went through the entire NASM list of schools, researched every single one of them of the types of degrees that they offered, and what the facts showed is that the number of music performance majors may be, at this time, exceeding the number of music ed majors, whereas 30, 40 years ago, the number of music performance majors was tiny. But it is now exceeding it. Well, why is that? Well, the self-interest of a studio teacher whose goal, that the private instructor of that student when they come to college, is to make them the very best trombone, trumpet, flute, whatever, is to make them the very best they can. Their goal is harmed by that student having to spend time working on other instruments, taking ed classes, taking methods classes. I remember going to tuba lessons with my lower lip just raw from playing clarinet all week. And I hardly couldn't play tuba at all. And so those studio teachers their mission is to make you the best player they can. And the best way they can do that is say, be a performance major. You'll get to spend more time with me. The ensemble director has an incentive to say, I like performance majors. They're not taking ed classes. They're doing nothing but honing their craft and sitting in my ensembles. Leonard Slatkin said, I didn't hear it personally, but I was told that he once said in a clinic that all of the performance jobs in America can be filled by graduates of Curtis, Juilliard, and Peabody. Period. Don't need anybody else. So those higher ed institutions that are producing music performance majors, that are turning themselves from higher ed institutions of music education that want to be conservatories instead, I believe have an obligation to ask themselves why. And so in the article at the end I say it's because the article is for school band and orchestra directors. It's the school band and orchestra directors who need to educate their students and the students' parents. Because educating the student is not enough. Because once they leave, they're 18-year-olds. That private studio teacher is now mom. The ensemble director is dad. They're going to do whatever mom and dad say. They're heavily influenced by them. I mean, at the Crane School of Music, my tuba teacher was Pete Popeil, and my life revolved around Pete Popeil and Elliot Del Borgo, my ensemble director. So it's not, you can't expect the 18-year-old, but they can start being educated about this, that when someone mentions you should be a performance major, the response should be, please give me a list of your graduates in the last 10 years who are currently working full-time as performing musicians. That's all. I don't think that's too much to ask. Give me a list. And if there's no names on the list, or there's one or two, then now please tell me what What about me is so different. Sorry, I just hit my microphone and he's over there going, don't hit your microphone. Yeah. What about me is so different that would cause me to break this 10-year trend of nobody. It's hard to tell that 18-year-old who just wants to be a star and has been the first chair player wherever they've been and everything that, you're not going to be that. You're a good musician. You've got a lot to offer. You're a fine player, and you could be a great teacher. Now, what's the impact on music education? Let's just say hypothetically that at a university like that, 50 new students come in. The top 25 musical performers are told, we want you to be music performance majors. You're too good to be a music ed major. The bottom 25 are told, you're not up to being a music performance major, you're going to be a music ed major. 4 years later, they graduate. You have taken the bottom half of musicians and said, you're now going to educate the next generation of musicians? Or does that make sense? And so consequently, this trend has caused, we're graduating over 10,000 music performance majors per year. Over 10,000 students graduate each year with a music performance degree.
How many jobs are there?
To fill a couple dozen jobs. I don't know. Not that many. And so we've created a little bit of malpractice with them. Many of them then come back and get teacher certification. Sometimes those teacher certification courses are not quite as comprehensive as a music ed degree. So we may be sending good musicians out, not quite as well equipped to be music educators. And then we've taken this other group that we've said, you're the music educators, who have maybe not performed at a very, very high level themselves musically, and said, you're going to be the teachers. I just think that's a recipe for disaster, and it's not fair to the kids. If you've got a student who comes in who really doesn't play that well, who doesn't play well enough to make a living at it, and says, but I love music, but I don't want to be a teacher, that's why they have a liberal arts degree with a major in music. It doesn't pretend to tell them they're going to be a performer. It doesn't tell them they're going to be a teacher. It says, you are going to be a well-educated person who is going to be interested and loves music and can be a fine member of a community band. That's what that degree is for. So and part two is going to be about some things in the curriculum. I feel much less well-equipped to get into specifics of curriculums because I have not, I've been an adjunct, but I've not been on the faculty inside higher education. So I relied very heavily on a lot of interviews with people who I think are successful higher ed music educators, people who care deeply about the trade, and all of whom were promised complete anonymity. So whereas all the things that are in that second article are things I believe very strongly in, but they weren't my original ideas. So.
Well, I'm hoping that that really does resonate with some people and can start to bring up these issues. That's very interesting.
There are some changes occurring. In the February issue of SBO magazine, I read an article about
February 2019.
2019 about Valdosta State University. Now, I don't know if that's a good program, but what they did is did a bottom-up look at what they were doing in their program, and they said, we cannot train a great musician and a music educator in 4 years. And that's why so many students. So they reduced the number of hours that it took to get the bachelor's degree, but have no certification. So the first 4 years were spent on building a great all-around musician, and then they have a Master of Arts in teaching, and it's a 1 year, and they said it's extraordinarily rigorous.
Kind of like an MBA.
ABC, kind of like American Band College, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying like in the business world, it's kind of like an MBA.
Yeah, like an MBA.
Right.
And ABC does that in a summer thing of very, very rigorous, focusing laser beam on the skills needed to be a great educator. And so they are offering that as a 5-year package, bachelor's, master's degree, with the bachelor's being a non-certified, making you a great musician, and the master's degree being, we've now helped develop your musicianship. Now we're going to give you all the tools to become a great master teacher. And I think you've got to be encouraged that they stepped back and looked at their program and said, what we're doing is not producing the kind of teachers that we need them to be. So bravo to them, and I hope others. There's no easy solution because it's, you're trying to put 10 pounds of sand into a 5-pound bag when you build a curriculum. But as long as universities are teaching things that they want to teach in ways that they want to teach. If they're teaching Renaissance music because they like teaching Renaissance music, when that might have limited use to a music teacher, then you've got to say, who are you serving?
So tell me about Sound Like This. Something you were telling me about earlier. It
Yeah.
sounds really exciting, and I cannot wait to go to my computer and check it out.
Well, I found, talking to kids, that they have never heard a great player on their instrument. And it's kind of mind-boggling because there's so much on YouTube, and that's the problem. There is so much on YouTube, and they're spending time on YouTube, but they're looking at cat videos or something, I don't know. And so I just assumed that there was this wonderful resource where they could go 10 great trombone players and hear them, but there isn't. So I spent last summer with the faculty at Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, musicians from the Army Field Band, other professional musicians that I knew, and just saying, give me your top 5 of the musicians, when you want to say, this is the kind of sound you should have, your favorites. Give me your favorites to listen to. And then I took that enormous list and waded through all of their websites, searched YouTube clips, and I tried to focus on younger artists, simply because a 14-year-old is not going to look at a black and white grainy photo of Pablo Casals, fabulous cellist, but that's not going to resonate with them. So I wanted to find some younger people with some really high-quality videos, great sound, great video. And so on my website, little plug here, thomaspalmatier.com. I don't make any money from that. It's not monetized, thomaspalmatier.com. And then there's a button there that says Sound Like This. And on the Sound Like This page, for each instrument in the band and the orchestra, I've got 3 or 4 artists, and under each of those artists there are 3 or 4 YouTube clips. So the first link on the artist is to their web page, and then the 2 or 3, and I've gone through each YouTube clip and make sure that they're good. So for instance, for French horn, if you're a horn player, you have got to go to Sound Like This and click on Genghis Barbies. It's for female horn players who do music videos, and it's incredible. It will make everybody want to play French horn. So, and included in there, I was very intentionally tried to make sure that I had, for instance, female tuba and euphonium players, female trombone players, female trumpet players, and people of color as well. I want students to be able to go there and be able to find someone that looks like them, that they can relate to. The tuba player, at Blue Lake, I ran into this wonderful young woman named, now I can't think of her name. I guess, look on my website. She's absolutely fantastic, but she recently graduated from Juilliard, and man, can she play. Sam is her name. Her name's Samantha, so Sam, and she's great. And so I want that little 85-year-old 7th grade girl who wants to play tuba, or 85-pound, sorry, 85-year-old, really slow learner there. that little tiny 7th grade girl who wants to play tuba, I want her to look at Sam Lake and say, wow, yeah, it's possible, I can do it. So Sound Like This. I think that if kids could spend 15 minutes a week, can you imagine what your trombone section would sound like if they spent 15 minutes a week listening to Joe Alessi? Because right now, the students are imitating the person next to them. Yep. Or
their bad band director on trumpet that is not a trumpet player and is trying my best.
Yeah.
Well, and that's such a fantastic resource, too, for band and orchestra students, because there are so many times when I maybe have that extra 3 minutes. The schedule was a little different than I expected it to be, or a shorter class, and I just want to be able to search. And how many times have I searched YouTube for French horn and just kind of done this until I finally found something that I thought was good? How nice to have a resource with multiple sets of people that are all vetted, if you will.
You play Genghis Barbies when they're coming into band, and everybody's going to want to switch to French horn.
Gonna do it tomorrow.
Okay, good. Before we wrap up, I do have one request for your listeners, and that is, these articles for SBO Magazine, when I was first offered the opportunity to have a public forum, I've got an article plan, and I came up with about 15 topics. I'm a little worried about what happens when I run out. So I would love it if they would get in touch with me and just say, hey, we'd like, for instance, one of the upcoming topics was suggested by a reader who said, how about doing an article about how to teach the American March? So I'm going to have an article about how to teach the American March, but mostly offer some great resources for people on how to do that. So any topics that they think that would be helpful, bring it on. I'd love to research it and write about it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the program.
Oh.
It is truly an honor. It's been a pleasure to get to work with you all day, and you were just a treat for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And for the folks here on the podcast, thanks for supporting the podcast and being part of the big band community. We're all in it together, but let's face it, we're all just band kids.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Clef. For more great content, subscribe on our website at beyondtheclef.com. And be sure to follow us on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Facebook.